Alright guys, tell me if this situation sounds familiar to you. You're multi-tabling, you're in the cutoff, you've opened the king nine of spades, the big blind's called. The flop comes jack of hearts, seven of hearts, three of diamonds. Big blind checks, you glance at the table, you've got something else going on. You don't think too much about it, you check back, you don't like the look of your hand. The turn is the five of clubs. Big blind checks again, you've got this delayed c-bet opportunity, you glance at the table and you kind of have this slightly frustrated, disappointed feeling that you don't know what to do. You don't have a game plan for this spot, even though this spot comes up all the time. And that feels kind of wrong, like you really ought to know what you're doing. But you don't, and then, you've 3-bet ace-queen on another table, you get distracted by that, you check the hand, big blind leads the river, you fold. The hand gets swept under the carpet forever. You played it on autopilot. You don't think twice about it. But the next time you're in a spot like this, you get the same sinking feeling that you're really lacking clarity. You're lacking an overall game plan. In this video, I'm going to show you how to unpack a sim so that you formulate a game plan, how to study poker on your own. It's very much a teach a man to fish type of video today, because I don't want you guys just feeling lost in really common spots that are important to your win rate and important to your mindset. Let's learn how to craft a game plan for a spot like this so that you can autopilot in a good way. You can autopilot based on past experience and knowledge and not based on confusion. Let's get into it. When you look at a sim like this, it's no wonder that you're put off studying. It's confusing, right? It looks like a mess at first glance. How on earth are you meant to take this strategy and apply it to your games? How can you possibly access anything like this in-game? This is why I built the Carrot Poker School. I wanted people to understand the nuts and bolts, the hand categories and the reasoning, so that they could try to solve it for themselves with limited time and, the pressure of actually playing a poker session. Let's do that here. Let me show you how we do that. We start doing this from grade 1 of the Carrot Poker School. If you've not taken the Carrot Poker School, I'm going to give you a code, and that code is investment, because I do believe it's an investment in your poker future. That code will work on grade 1 if you just want to dip your toes in and get started, but it will also work on the full scholarship and Golden Carrot Pass, which is access to everything as well. I'm going to give you a flavor of what we do in the Carrot Poker School here in this video. Thresholds between hand classifications. This is the language we're going to be speaking in, and this is how we're going to make sense of a spot like this. We're going to outline a bunch of different hand classifications based on equity and EV, and then map them to a strategy, which could be a pure action or it could be a mix of actions, but we're always going to explain why. So let's start at the top and talk about the value range here. Where can we start value betting for the chosen sizing, which in this spot is half pot, and I would try to be very consistent with your delayed c-bets. Like, when you're delayed c-betting, based on the texture, try to choose just one sizing. On this texture, I think half pot's kind of good, because this is a turn where villain can make some nutty stuff sometimes. If it's drier, you might use a bigger sizing. It's up to you, but even if you just study half pot delayed c-bets for now, or B75s, it doesn't really matter, but just study a certain sizing and get used to that. So when you go half pot, your value hands will span down to a certain place in this hand grid. And my first mission for you is to find the point in this hand grid where hands stop betting for value because they're no longer strong enough. So you can see here that hands like kings, queens, aces, they do slow play sometimes, right? I'm not going to talk about that too much today. Ace jack, king jack, queen jack, jack 10, jack 9, jack 8, they can value bet for half pot. If you trace that down to underpairs, they can as well. Eights, by the way, and tens are similar hands here, but eights is more vulnerable. That's why you see this hand actually betting more often than tens, just if that's confusing. But you can value bet. Nines, eights, ace 7, okay, king 7, a bit of an anomaly. It's still betting. It can still value bet. Queen 7. And then as we get down to a bad 7 or some sort of 5 that is not hearts or some sort of 3, we stop value betting. So the value threshold here runs out at a bad 7. Once it's a 5 with no redraw, it's no longer a bet. 6s, that's a good hand. It's like a threshold hand. So we need to understand that we need a certain amount of equity to value bet on this turn. And when we lack that equity, we move from the value band that we've just outlined that spans from the nuts all the way down to about pocket sixes to the showdown band, which has to check. We could call this the mandatory checking zone. That starts at about 5x no heart draw. See, ace 5 of spades, king 5 of spades, mandatory checking band, pocket fours have to check, deuces have to check. You can follow this, trace it all the way down through ace king, ace queen, ace 10, ace 9, until suddenly it runs out at ace 8. This is now the optional bluff zone. So you have 3 zones: value zone, checking zone, and optional bluff zone on the turn in a delayed c-bet node. If you can learn that, you will land on that turn, you will ask yourself, where is my king nine of spades? And then your brain will go, aha, it's in the optional bluff zone. And maybe you mix, maybe you roll, maybe you just bet because you think humans fold too much in your pool. It doesn't really matter, but your bedrock, your foundation is that king nine of spades falls in the optional bluff zone and can bet. So there's no more guessing. There's no more like, I don't know what to do with my hand. I guess I'll just check because I don't like the look of it. We get rid of this amateurish thought process forever and we replace it with a clinical, in this spot, my air hands are optional bluffs, because they are. There were no requirements. There was no minimum standard for an air hand in a spot like this, because it's a very favorable spot for your range. So if you look at this range chart here, you can see that the cutoff range is ahead of the big blind range. In numbers, it's entitled to 2.48 chips, or big blinds, and big blind is only entitled to 1.63. That's called range advantage, right? And what that means is that you will get excess fold equity. We've talked about that concept before in these videos on YouTube. You will get villain to fold 43%, 44% of the time here in game theory when you make a half pot bet. The break-even point is 33%, right? So that's a 10, 11% overfold relative to what we call MDF, the sort of mathematical or minimum defense frequency or fold frequency. And that means that you auto-profit by betting any bluff hand, and it means that it won't be bad for you to bet with a random air hand. In reality, it'd be very good. Delayed c-bets are very overfolded spots. So when you understand all of that, it almost doesn't matter what your air hand is. If you have a hand like King Queen, you know that betting is not a mistake. You don't need to know the frequency. You don't need to know this is a 14% bet, but this other combo is 63% frequency bet. There is no magical beanstalk that grows out of your house when you hit the right frequency. You don't just suddenly get like bags of money thrown at you because you emulate a solver's frequency. That doesn't matter. What matters is that you understand why an air hand can bet here. You're kind of good at knowing where the value threshold begins and ends, where the checking zone begins and ends, and where the optional bluff zone begins and ends. It's only optional on the turn. On the river, it becomes mandatory. If you haven't bluffed by the river in a spot that's good for your range like this, where you're an in-position pre-flop raiser that's just been checked 2-3 times, you have to bluff by the river. So if you see a low showdown value hand checking here, let's take a combo like 9-8, you might think, well, double gutter, don't I just want to bet that? No, because you don't actually construct your betting range linearly in this spot. You can check and wait and bluff that on the river. You can bet that now. It doesn't really matter. But by the river, you're going to have to bluff 9 high, because now you're going to show down for nearly nothing, and you're again going to have excess fold equity in spots like this. So hopefully that sheds some light on just how you should understand this spot. And now when you autopilot that spot, you go, okay, optional bluff zone. I bluff or I don't bluff, but I understand I have to bluff by river if I don't have a showdown. You can do the same on river as well, by the way. So let's say you have bet the turn and the big blind is called, and then pick a river card that might cause you trouble here. I don't know. I always find like something that's like completing of some stuff, like a 9, is pretty tricky. Get big blind to check and then look at cutoff strategy. I'm going to give it a couple of sizes here that aren't all in. I'm not going to be advocating that you guys use all in. We'll use the Carrot Poker School sizes, sort of like your bread and butter here. They're 75, 150 for a spot like this, right? Or thereabouts, doesn't really matter. And then we can actually do the same thing on this node. So when you look at a river sim, right, river textures are going to be all over the place. Some of them are going to be really good for you. Some of them are going to be really bad for you. It depends. But what happens on this turn when you bet and villain calls this is that your ranges kind of go in different directions. Yours polarizes, villain condenses. We talk about this a lot in grade 2 lecture 1 of CPS. Carrot Poker School, not Child Protective Services. In this situation, the 9 river is a very good river for the cutoffs range. And after you've delayed c-bet the turn here, you need to have some concept of which river cards are good for your range and which river cards are bad. The 9 is good because you bet with quite a lot of straight draws and things like that on the turn. You had a lot of 9x betting that node. And so when you land on river, your range likes that, which is why you're now entitled to 5.13 chips out of the pot that's 9 chips, and your range equity is 52%, even though you've just bluffed a lot on turn and you know, been called. What that's going to mean is that you now have a lot of mandatory bluffs on the river that you're going to have to find. So we have a rule here for river play. If the river card is high EV for you, your range will now have a lot of mandatory bluffs on the end here. What do you need to be bluffing with? Well, the answer is stuff that's devoid of showdown value. What is that stuff? Well, let's have a look at some of the things we might have bet on turn that are like low showdown value. King 10, 0 check EV. The bottom right there, you can see it has no check EV at all, but it has bet EV. That's a mandatory bluff on the river. You can see the most common sizing solvers going for here is the B75, not the overbet. We've checked the flop, right? We've kind of capped our range a bit. We don't have as many pocket jacks, jack 7 suited type hands now. We have some straights. We can play some overbets here. But anyway, the point is that this high EV card is going to create a lot of mandatory bluffing for you. And now if you think about your range, you can do the same exercise we did before. You have your value zone. Where does it begin? Where does it end? Well, you can see here that we are going for value with ace jack, with king jack, with queen jack still, with jack 9 still. These hands are still thick enough. Villain does not have many straights that they play by check calling half pot on the turn. They either lead turn or check raise with a lot of their open enders and stuff. So that's why the 9 is so good for you, right? Things like jack 8, still value betting. Pocket 10s can still value bet. Where does it run out? Where do we go into the check zone? At pocket 8s. That's where the checking begins. I can see that quite quickly because I've practiced making loads of slides on like these thresholds, right? For Carrot Poker School lectures, that sort of thing. So you just want to ingrain that skill as well. So you get 8s here, you trace it down, 6s, still checking, 7x checking, this is clearly the checking band. Where does the showdown value run out? Where does the bluffing region start? And by the way, because this is such a good card, remember this will be mandatory bluffing now for the most part, not even optional. It starts just below these ace high hands here. When you get down to king queen, king 10, you no longer have any of this sliver of showdown value. You begin to enter the mandatory bluff. That won't always be true. There'll be some river cards that are hostile for your range that are not that good, or they're just totally bricky, and you are going to have to usually give up some very low showdown value hands in those spots. But I wanted to start with the 9 river because it's a tricky one that you might not realize what it's doing. It's actually very good for the range that aggressed on the turn. Okay, let's look at a different river card now for this spot. Now we look at a card that is not better for us. If you recall on the turn, the 3 of spades isn't going to hit us after we've bet turn because we were checking behind with our 3x. If we go back to this node, that was in our showdown band. So that is not a card that makes us lots of big hands. That's a card that's going to be a bit better for big blind. But in general, bricks are just going to be lower EV than stuff that completes our draws. So if we go back to cutoff here, it's the same as before where we still have a value range that starts at the nuts and goes down to a certain point where we can no longer value bet. Once we reach a hand like pocket 9s here, it's becoming kind of iffy whether we can value bet. And when we get down to a 7, you can see that for the most part, we just can't. So the value threshold here ends at a similar place. 7x can't go for value, 9s, 8s can't really go for value, a jack can. So that's pretty intuitive, right? You go again for value with top pair. Here again, it's mostly B75, a bit of overbet now that's coming in here. So we have our checking band that again goes down to ace high. Very common pattern here that the ace X is, okay, that's a bad example, that's a pair, but ace 4 is going to be checking for a tiny bit of EV. There's ace 4 of hearts here, the other ace 4 didn't bet turn, and so that can just check. And then once we get down to king queen, again, hands like king 10, we're bluffing, we're in that bluffing zone, but now it's not so much of a mandatory bluffing zone as it is an optional bluffing zone, because now we're in a less favourable world for our range. Our range is now entitled to 4.62 big blinds in EV, not 5 point whatever it was before. Our equity is actually 47%. We're a dog now in terms of equity. This is a more hostile run out for our range. And so sometimes we settle for basically hardly any pot share. Sometimes we're going to take a hand that can't actually win by checking, and we're going to check it anyway because, well, we don't have as much excess fold equity now. It's not a spot that we can just bluff everything indiscriminately like we can on a card like a 9, where lots of our air disappears and lots of stuff gets there. So on the 3, we're a bit more selective about what we bluff. Does that mean that you can't bluff? No. Maybe data will say that you can in a spot like this. In fact, it generally says that this is a reasonable spot for fold equity. It's just that you want to understand that it's not mandatory. You don't have to anymore with a lot of combos. You'll want to prioritize ones with better blockers and prioritize doing it against villains that fold more and pools that fold more and stuff like that. Let's take another type of river card now and try and understand the lay of the land there. Let's say the river is the king of clubs. What do you think is going to happen here? What would you predict? Is this going to be one where we have a lot of mandatory bluffs, or is this going to be one where we have to give up a lot? Where do you think the value threshold ends here and the checking band begins? Where do you think the bluffing band is going to begin when we look at this? Do you think we're going to bluff ace high now? Is this good enough for range that we turn ace X into a bluff? Have a go at answering these questions and then we'll take a look. The answer is that the king is even better for our range than the 9 was. The king is a superb river card. Our EV is 6.13 and our equity is 60%. See how powerful it is to compare these things across river cards so you can understand what's going on. Far from playing this hand on autopilot in the future, guys, you're going to have a concrete feel for how these situations play out. This is truly an elite river for range. On this elite river card, you can see that once again, we're in the domain of always bluffing when we have no showdown or limited showdown, and always bluffing at a profit. So to summarize, we have these three types of river cards that can follow the node where we've delayed c-bet the turn, or basically bet the turn in any situation. We have hostile rivers, like bricks and board pairs and stuff that improves the condensed range of the big blind caller and doesn't help our turn bluffs at all. Then we have the more sort of slightly favourable to neutral rivers, things like the 9 that do allow us to just bluff really freely, but they're not quite as good as these elite rivers like the king. If you learn that pattern, now go back to the king 9 of spades, you're in that spot, you've 3-bet the ace queen on another table, you turn your attention back to the turn. Now instead of being lost and having that sinking hollow feeling that you don't know what you're doing, you're just like, this is an optional turn bluff with my king 9, I'm going to RNG that's going to be a bet this time, boom, done. Or maybe if you're more exploitative, I don't think pool's protected enough here, I'm just always going to bet my hand, boom, done. Then you go into the river, and it's some card like a queen, 3-bet the ace queen, you're getting involved in that ace queen hand, but you glance back at this table and you just go, okay, that's an elite river for my range. I just have to bluff here. And you just bluff. And you don't even care if you get called, because you just know what you're doing. Poker's more fun. You feel more confident. What's not to like? So again, on this kind of clubs, just for completeness sake here, you have a value range. It goes down to a similar region. You can still value bet Jack X here. The king is a brick for villain. The reason your EV and equity are so high here is that villain doesn't just call the turn with a random king high very often. You end up being able to value bet most of the Jack X that you could have value bet on the 3 river or the 9 river, but also all this king X that you've just hit as well. And remember, you did bet lots of hands like your king 9 here on the turn, king 6, that kind of thing. That's why it's so good for you. Then the main thing that changes towards the bottom of the range is that the checking threshold, that checking band, starts to turn into a bluff a bit higher up. So even though ace high does have some showdown here, you still end up bluffing with it because the fold equity is at a premium. The fold equity is just so much higher. We've got a weird all-in sizing here, diluting things. We've got a pot sizing here. But let me change that back to like the B75 just for consistency. If we look at B75 here and see that we are bluffing with a combo like, let's say, Queen 8, and we're bluffing at quite a bit of profit. So bluffs are auto profits on elite rivers. I'll leave you with that thought. Don't forget to invest in your poker future. Use code INVESTMENT for 20% off either grade 1 or the full scholarship of the Carrot Poker School or the Golden Carrot Pass. Click the top link in the description to head on over to carrotcorner.com to take advantage of that offer. And I'll see you back here for more content like this soon. Do let me know if this is the sort of video you'd like to see again on this channel. Take care, guys, and have fun delayed c-betting and barreling. Bye for now.